I'm really honored to have Amjad Masad from Replit, founder of Replit, with me to talk about software development cycles and how you won't need any engineers anymore. Everything will be written by chatbots.
That's not my words.
I agree. That's what people are thinking and saying.
Yeah.
But maybe you can start by just describing the journey to founding the company. What made you start the company, and what was the whole genesis behind Replit?
Yeah, it actually goes back to my school days, I don't know, now maybe 15 years ago, 16 years ago. And what struck me going to computer science school, and we were talking about it earlier, we both of our fathers, independently, they didn't coordinate, forced us into computer engineering, electrical engineering instead of computer science, because
Good thing engineering, computer science is real science.
Yeah, and so as I was going through school and learning different programming languages, like one course is object-oriented programming in Java, another is web applications in PHP, whatever. Every time I'd have to set up the development environment, and I didn't have a laptop at the time, and that would take a long time. And God forbid you want to share a program with someone. I mean, we used to email programs, which is wild. That was also kind of around the same time as GitHub, but it was still hard. And I was like, we have Google Docs, we have all the software. Why isn't there a place where you can share code and just run it and have all the dependencies and all the versions and everything match? And I was like, surely someone had built it. And so that was maybe 2009. And it turns out no one's built it. And I was surprised, did I find $100 bill in a Grand Central Station type of surprise? Well, it turns out it's very hard. That's why no one's done it.
Yeah.
And so the first attempt at that was an open source project that was the first to kind of compile Python, a bunch of languages to JavaScript. That was back in 2011. That got me a job in the US at Code Academy, worked there for a while. Started Replit in around 2016-17, the company, and the mission is okay, if we make programming, this more convenient thing, could you actually get a lot more people participating in it?
Yeah.
And that's been the ongoing thesis of the company.
No, I had the same experience. I was a developer before, I went to the dark side, as my friends who are still programmers talk about it. And you basically literally spend, I don't know, a week to get your environment set up, right? To figure out where the libraries are, where the source code, VCS, that's kind of, I'm dating myself, was around. And then, of course, we hacked Emacs, right? If you didn't like anything with Emacs, you would just go and redo it and compile it and use it the way you like. But I think, do you think that this has enabled people who are not used to engineering or anything to come in and start programming much easily?
Yes, slowly and then accelerating now.
Yeah.
So initially, it was very useful for people learning to code. Then sort of useful for entrepreneurs, and we had a period where a bunch of startups in YC would use it to prototype their first version. And now we're seeing adoption in the enterprise. And in the enterprise, we're seeing non-developers mostly adopt it. So, we have a bunch of PMs at some large companies that I can't say the name yet because we haven't gotten the logos, that will want to prototype the thing instead of waiting for the engineers. We have designers at a lot of these companies using it. And so, yes, what we're seeing right now, our view is that LLMs are not only great for engineers, actually, perhaps more importantly, they are making all of us programmers.
Yeah.
So everyone, Jensen Huang is famous for saying everyone's now a programmer. I really believe in the next few years, everyone will be a programmer.
So do you think that IDEs become kind of the platform for kind of pulling together everything? Almost where you do your coding, maybe even your UX to some extent, connection to Figma or something, and then kind of testing and everything? Is that
for some definition of an IDE?
Okay.
In 2018, I wrote a blog post saying Replit is not an IDE.
Okay.
And the reason is because I was trying to make the statement that an IDE was this moment of time where you're sitting down, you have all this classical tools for analysis and all of that. And I think everything will become AI. why do you need language servers if the AI actually understands the code and can map it, has RAG all over it? And as we add more of the reasoning aspect to LLMs, then you really don't need any of the classical algorithm tools. So I think, Replic's mission right now is to discover what is that fully AI-enabled IDE, and we think it's going to look fairly different.
So maybe before we go talk on your journey of how you are building AI into your platform, maybe talk about the infrastructure, right? You manage a lot of compute, and a lot of kind of as the developers come on board, or people writing code, or I shouldn't say developers. What has been the journey, and how do you manage all of that?
Yeah, so initially I had this innovation of running things in the browser. That's a dead end.
Yeah.
And it's a lot of the competitors continue going down that dead end, and now they're migrating.
Yeah.
When I saw in like 2016, you had like Docker, you had Kubernetes, you had the cloud getting a lot better. My view was like, okay, classical compute is getting cheaper. These sandboxing technologies are getting a lot easier, and so let's build it on the cloud. And so we built this like large system that does everything from setting up a container to deploying it all the way. So entire life cycle of software development built in one place. And happy to get into any of those details, but it is quite complex of a system, and it takes a lot of work just to keep it up and running because we have millions of users.
And does it run on any of the hyperscalers? And
yes.
So you can take it, like if you want to run it on AWS versus GCP, and it kind of doesn't matter where you're running it?
So we have a big partnership with GCP.
Okay.
We announced it last year, and we run on GCP mostly.
Okay.
But if we're talking to enterprises and they have an AWS account, we'll be able to support that. Yeah.
So let's talk about AI maybe. That's what people are more interested in. So how did you build like your engineers? Like first of all, how do you even find engineers who know AI if you don't pay them $10 million, right? It's kind of that's the going rate for engineers from what I hear from OpenAI and Anthropic and all those folks.
It is freaking wild. So what I did initially was start doing things myself around the time of GPT-3, like 2020. And we actually got a lot of the features shipped, but without any AI folks. Around 21, we realized that we need to do AI in-house because the price and latency of these models were just not the kind of thing that we would want to have, especially because we have a really great freemium experience and we want to keep that. And so I was getting really interested in small models. There wasn't a lot of evidence at the time, but I thought that, I don't know when the Chinchilla paper came out, I think early 22, and it showed that you can, model performance is a function of compute and data and parameter size, but even if you hold parameter size constant, you can scale compute and data and have a small model that you can run cheaply and fast. And so we started playing around with small models, and we actually got something working on an open source project from Salesforce, of all people.
Okay.
And Salesforce, I think accidentally did the first sort of 3 billion parameter long training. And it was actually a very solid model. We built something around it. It wasn't great, but then we started training our own. By the time we started training our own, we actually hired our head of AI, Michele Catasta, from Google. We actually met him as part of the deal with Google. And he ended up joining us, and he was really excited about the potential for Replit, given all our users, and potential for, because Replit has idea to deployment. You can actually, first of all, we have a lot of data on that, and we have the audience to kind of start experimenting with this idea. So that's the thing that made him not take a $10 million
job with somewhere else.
Yeah, don't push it. But then we started betting on sort of young, early career folks.
Okay.
And we started training people inside the company. By the way, historically, we've always done that.
That's right.
We've had a lot of success with that kind of approach.
And that has always been the thing, like when Kubernetes first came out, right? Not everybody knew, and you kind of trained people to kind of how you manage, and even when a new type of things. Yeah, so it's kind of interesting. So you talked about models and large models versus small models. Any thoughts, like, do you really need to have an Anthropic or a Cohere or even OpenAI model to run all of these things, or can you use something from Hugging Face or like a Llama 3 to kind of do most of your what you need to do?
Well, so I think the frontier models are kind of prototype tools. Like, GPT-4 when it first came out, you can't really build anything with it. It's slow, and it's really powerful, but
expensive.
It's super expensive. And so you prototype something with it, and then you take that prototype, and you're like, okay, how can I, let me try all these different models, let me try fine-tuning a model, and so you go through that experiment. And then eventually, the big labs figure out how to pack GPT-4 into GPT-4o. But it's hard to wait for that. So I think that same pattern will happen with GPT-5. GPT-5 will come out super amazing, AGI is coming, the world's ending, all of that. We'll go through that cycle. And then at the end, it's like, oh, this is a really powerful tool, but it's freaking slow. And then people start sort of distilling that, and you have all this open source activity. So I'm a big fan of prototyping in the frontier and then figuring out how to bring it with cost and speed.
And any specific open source or small models that you like, or is it?
Man, I've been liking the Chinese models. What's it called? DeepSeek code model.
Yeah.
It's really good. We're now sort of building agents at Replit. So we just released our code repair agent. And it's fine-tuned on a DeepSeek model, and so they're doing a great job. I think they just released something that's better than Llama 3.
Okay. How do you test these agents, the models built on these agents, right? Because one of the things is it's not deterministic, right? It's not like when you code, or even the agents, how is the testing going to be done for them?
2-3 years ago, I popularized vibe testing.
Yeah.
And it's been an industry standard.
Yeah.
But we actually, just like our research team, a big part of what they do is they come up with benchmarks and evals and things like that. So the moment we're building a new feature, we try to find some benchmark, and sometimes there's academic benchmarks.
Yeah.
Right now, with agents, SWE agent is the main thing people.
Yeah.
And by the way, they suck in all sorts of ways. There's no benchmark that's really great.
Yeah.
But the moment you get to production, then your benchmark is your users.
Okay.
So when we were really focused on the completion model, the benchmark is the next model or the fine-tuned version creates better completion acceptance.
Yeah.
That's really the only honest thing, is our users happy?
Yeah.
Everything else is just a sort of a signal.
Turning to one of my favorite topics, all these code writers, right? Poolside, Magic.dev, what's the other one that did Devin? What do you think about them? And first of all, from a business perspective, you also have Copilot just sitting there do you think software developers will disappear and everything will be done by these code writers, or where do you think this all goes?
Well, so my view, and it might change with what we see from GPT-5, is that LLMs tend to emulate the median sort of whatever role you want from it, right? So it's sort of like the median writer. It's not the best writer. It is like the median coder. It's not the best coder.
That's right.
And actually, there was a study, I think in some business school, where they went into a company and they gave LLMs to everyone in the company.
Yeah.
And what it did, it shifted the lowest performers closer to the top performers, but the top performers didn't go up all that high. They got some efficiencies.
Yeah.
So my view on LLMs right now, it's really great for those getting started, for those who don't have a skill and knowledge. And this is Replit's opportunity, has been for a long time. And now I think what a lot of these startups are trying to do is can you actually create an expert programmer?
Yeah.
And I think still the jury is out on whether you can do it. I mean, the the pre-training game is almost done in that you can't get better than GitHub.
Yeah.
And now a lot of it is post-training.
Yeah.
And so the big question on post-training is that, can you generate agent-like trajectories that you can fine-tune on? That makes it better than an expert programmer. And I don't know what the answer is, to be honest.
I look, personally, I don't think you'll get an expert programmer. As you said, it'll be like a good enough programmer. It'll do a lot of things that programmers hate to do, right? Like writing documentation, right? Or, putting comments in your code. Programmers hate it. It'll just do it for you, writing unit tests, right? All of that stuff is going to do. But when you see somebody, I'm dating myself, when you see Bill Joy's code when he wrote the Unix kernel and stuff like that, that's like a work of art almost, like it's beauty, right?
Yeah.
It's like so succinct, it like does so many things so nicely. Those kind of things is not going to come out of, like those programmers who are like 10x or 100x programmers, I don't think these copilots are ever going to be able to achieve that.
Yeah, I mean, the best sort of bull case for creating an expert programmer is something like the sort of near infinite context length might make it so that just filling in the context will make it better just because it has a lot more context than humans. And then the other one is, can you do RL self-play? So AlphaZero style.
Yeah.
So the way AlphaZero works is that, it actually, there's like no pre-training and then it starts random. And because there's an environment where it gets feedback from, it can just self-improve.
Yeah.
So can you do that with software? Maybe, like because there's some ground truth.
Fair enough.
Does this program run? Is there a unit test? But we're tracking it. Our view still is that right now LLMs are really great at providing this floor for everyone.
And how does the whole software development lifecycle changes? Like you guys are already working on it,
Yes.
creating these agents. So where is the thing that is going to help the most?
Yeah, so so far with Copilot and such, everything is attacking the code writing process. The problem with that is writing code is at best like 25% of an engineer's time, and at best, probably is 15%. But we'd like to think it's 25. Yeah. But and then so debugging, testing, sort of debugging deployment crashes, all of that stuff. It has not impacted that yet. And part of the reason, I think, is because everything's fragmented.
Yeah.
And this is Replic's opportunity because deployments and development
Manage
is the same product.
Yeah.
So we're actually building agents that go from deployment to a sort of a development branch that can tell you, like, hey, that happened in production, here's a PR.
Yeah. So the whole CI/CD pipeline you can basically automate and and figure out what needs to be done, and if there's a bug happens, you do the tracing and it kind of has an automatic feedback loop, right?
Yeah, and if there's entrepreneurs in the audience, this is probably the best place to go if you want to really build a business, because everyone's competing on the let me complete your code.
That's right.
And then very little is happening on the CI/CD, on the testing, and the debugging,
So what happens with all these code writing? Like, do we really think that there will be less software develop? Like will software developer, like from a business perspective, do software developers still get paid a premium? Do they kind of get paid less? Are there more applications that gets built? Like what happens, because your technology will automate the software development process. Some of the code completion things will start working. But what happens? Like, are there more software, less developers? What's the end state?
So I think for sure more software, and this partially has to do with AI making writing software easier, but more so it has to do because calling into AI from that software is super powerful, and you can automate a lot of business workflows. You can, like at Replit, we have all these Slack bots that do things for us using LLMs, support bots and whatever. It's just so much fun to automate parts of the business right now, and so there's going to be a lot more of that. You and I on a previous call we talked about what's that paradox?
Oh, Jevons paradox.
Yeah.
So the Jevons paradox, I don't know if people know, it's an economic theory where if you actually reduce the price of a service or any product, instead of actually the usage goes up. So whoever does that actually benefits because you end up actually making more money or more resources are used, although the price of that service has gone down.
Yeah, and I don't know why it's called this paradox. It kind of makes sense.
Yes.
I guess some people expect, the price goes down, then
it's like open source software. People thought that that there will be less software because it's open source.
Right, but I think there's going to be a lot more software, right? And then in terms of salaries and software engineers, whatever, I do think there's going to be downward pressure on sort of let's call it middleware developer, software engineer, because those things are very highly represented on the internet. And so anything that is on GitHub a ton, I think that will make it a lot more easier for juniors to get started, a lot more people to enter the field, a lot more people to not require engineers because they can go use Replit and do it themselves. So like the full stacky type role, I think will probably, have a downward pressure on salaries. The sort of things that are not really represented in LLMs, like if you've tried to get an LLM to write assembly, it really sucks at it. Yeah. So people who are writing assembly, writing low-level C, working at NASA or SpaceX, writing sort of, I don't know, Haskell, whatever people write there, I don't think they're gonna get affected. I also don't think their productivity is gonna improve a whole lot until we figure out the self-play situation. Yes. And so it'll bifurcate. You'll have a lot more people earning less perhaps, but you have a small set of people with really amazing job security.
But I also think one of the things that our colleges and people where they get trained have to figure out, because a lot of times the first developers when they come in, they get trained by doing some of the grunt work, right? They kind of go find the bug, they kind of learn the code, and a lot of that stuff is now going to be done by these co-pilots or the agents and things like that. So how do you train them so that when they come into the workforce, they actually know how to do these things, and they're kind of at a level that you don't have to train them? And
so here's my prediction, that software engineering will start looking more like sort of a trade-like thing, and you're going to have vocational schools as opposed to like 4-year computer science schools, right? We started seeing that with the boot camp thing, and it was limited success, but it was success. People like to poo-poo a lot of these things, but we hire people from them still. Yeah. But I think this will go on steroids, because really you don't need 4 years of computer science to be super productive in doing full stacky type product engineering.
So I guess my skill of knowing to write in C and C++ is still valuable, I guess, because there's nobody getting trained on that. Any questions? Go ahead.
So I think based on this conversation, you're assuming that mostly developers are writing new code. It's not true. Of course, everyone knows that. So as most developers spend most time maintaining or enhancing existing code. So I think the biggest problem in that field really is not can AI write code? It's more about, can it write code that is bug-free, can run on top of the existing stuff, and how do you validate that output?
Yeah, I mean, that's the reason I said if you want to impact the field, try to look outside of just the plain old completion Copilot style, because I think this is where you get a lot more context. So if you write if you modify an application and do it right, you need to be able to know what's happening in production. You need to be able to know production traces. You need to be able to know performance traces. So maybe Datadog should be working on this, but because they have all this data.
Yeah. And it also means that people, again, if you're just doing maintaining of code, people who have those kind of maybe jobs, it's probably going to be harder versus you have to write new code because a lot of the other stuff is taken care of, right? There's a question over there.
Are you noticing that developers are having to fine-tune the models for different domains, like GPU programming domain versus chip design domain versus writing software for specific domain like retail, financial services and such, or are the foundational models scaling well? Or?
What we're seeing just broadly in the industry, and not just at Replit, is that, and there's been a research on this recently, like in-context learning is actually so much better than fine-tuning. In-context learning meaning prompting. Fine-tuning is actually kind of hard to get right. It's unclear how many samples you need. It's unclear. Like you can fine-tune sort of a style of outputs, but to fine-tune a specific code base or a specific industry or domain, we haven't seen a bunch of evidence of that. What we're seeing is the long context domains, long context windows allow you to kind of learn an entire new skill within that context. So for example, Google Gemini learned an entire language that wasn't represented in the pre-training in context. Now Google Gemini has a KV cache. So you'll be able to put something in context, lock it, put it in that, cache it. We'll have to pay for it, but and then the requests are not that expensive. So my bet is fine-tuning is still going to be something that like the labs are doing and perhaps the more advanced technical companies, but for the most part, most people are still doing prompting.
What do you think is a new job that's going to come out there in the next 2 to 5 years that we'll see? Like as we have these, I have college kids coming out of school. What do you think they might be doing?
I've had trouble really thinking about a fundamentally new job. Like there was this excitement around prompt engineering, but I think prompting is like everyone will learn that in some capacity depending on their fields. What I think will happen, and this is like a more radical bet, is that more and more we're going to see generalists in the economy, and so entrepreneurs are the ultimate generalists, right? And when you're starting a company, you're the accountant, you're the finance guy, you're the business guy, and so I think because LLMs get you to median level at everything, we're going to see more generalists. We're going to see smaller firms with a whole crew of generalists. So in terms of if you're asking for your kids, for example, I would like really try to teach them to be more like entrepreneurs, more like generalists. Try to teach them like to know everything.
100%. I think that's what you need to be. You need to be smart and analytical in thinking, and then you go see a problem, and you can probably solve it, and you don't have to be a programmer or a coder to do that, and you can probably solve that problem and create value for yourself, and just with a few group of people, right? So I think that's what people have to learn. I think you had a question, sorry, I pointed.
Whenever we talk about AI writing code, it always is a very narrow thing we talk about, which is like either code completion or actually the act of writing some whatever incantation you're trying to do in whatever language you're doing, right? But if you really look at a job of a programmer, it's more than that, right? It's gathering the requirements, trying to do some design, trying to do some class structures or whatever, which is what we never talk about, but at least in my experience, that's where all the energy is spent. Right? And once you actually have clarified the things, then writing the code is actually the simpler part. So have you seen like any development in that regards, or maybe from the samples you guys are seeing at Rebel 8 or whatever? Are we going to go in that direction at all? Because if we're not going there, I just don't know whether programmers are going to be replaced. To me, that point is a moot point then.
Yeah, but by the way, I don't think programmers are going to be replaced. I think it is like an AGI problem to replace programmers. So you'd have to solve AGI to replace programmers. Again, we'll see an impact on salaries, but I don't really believe in this idea of automating all programmers. I made this comment a few times already, but one way we visualize it at Replit is the inner loop of programming and the outer loop. So the inner loop of programming is you run your unit test, or you're in the REPL, you run a command, you're coding, right? That's your coding, your inner loop. You're getting some feedback from that environment. The outer loop of programming is you're talking to stakeholders, you're in meetings, you are looking at production logs, and again, I've said multiple times that LLMs have not really impacted that. And I think really it's an opportunity for entrepreneurs to start building these things. In terms of what we're doing at Replit, we're trying to go upstream. So for example, we released this Figma to code plugin. It's like, can you take a Figma and like translate it at least to a first version of code? We also have this new experience on the site. It's an A/B test right now, but you start with a brainstorming AI. By the way, it's freaking hard to get these AIs to be good brainstormers because they just want to talk. Like every like,
and it's like a parrot, right?
Yeah.
Sarcastic parrot.
Yeah, and so like having something that like actually designs the thing with you, and then finally, the more context we fit about your production environment, about your dependencies, about your libraries, about what you like to do, personalization over time as a programmer. That's all things we're gonna work on. But I think there's going to be an entire industry of attacking that outer loop of programming.
Agreed. Right in the back.
How engineers at Replit are using LLMs in the SDLC, and are you seeing any improvements or velocity gains as a result of that?
So we're seeing a lot of velocity gains on the sort of more prototyping, getting to some place really quickly where we like it. But like, again, the hard engineering of getting systems up and running and maintaining them and scaling them, we haven't seen a whole lot of productivity improvements. And I think this is, again, this is what I'm talking about here. This is the outer loop of programming. It hasn't really been affected all that much. Internally, I think the thing that has been really great is being able to automate a lot of nonsense. So automating a lot of tests. We use Replit in some like, SRE and sort of fraud prevention. Like anytime there's a problem where it kind of looks a little fuzzy, you can use an LLM to do that. Where in the past you had to outsource something or get another employee or something like that. And I think that makes it so the team is leaner. We don't have to keep hiring. I think Replit helps a lot with that because the moment you can think of an automation, you can start a new Replit, start coding, and like deploy something really quickly and see it working. This is where we've seen the most impact on our productivity in engineering and outside engineering, business team, sales team, and all of that. We're automating a whole lot of things.
I think we can take one more question because I didn't realize that clock flipped over and now it's actually going up. I was like, what is the last question?
Hey, thank you both. It's been super insightful. I'd be curious how you think about the pricing for AI products. If you think about sort of Microsoft Copilot being very cheap, at least if you measure it against the claims that improves developer productivity by 10, 20%. Intercom, I think, has recently shifted to a more success-based pricing for the AI product. And so, like, are we going to see pricing tend towards whatever we save in developer hours and the salaries attached to that? Or are they more trending with the GPU cost? Or even talking about sort of like the value of the software you're using the tool for to create?
Yeah, one of the most frustrating things about being a VC now and hang out with a lot of them, and I'm an angel investor as well, is that they keep talking about they don't know where the value capture will happen. And the question there is like, can you actually charge for these things?
Yeah.
Or is it kind of table stakes?
Exactly.
And it's actually seems like maybe you can't really charge for them, right? Because like, because people expect them to be in products. ChatGPT keeps making things more free, and so if you have like the Notion AI upgrade, and then it's like, I'll just go use ChatGPT, and ChatGPT now can capture your screen. So ChatGPT like really kind of put a pressure on the entire industry whether you can monetize these things as add-ons. I don't know what the exact business model for AI. I do think that like the biggest winner so far has been the consumer. Yes. They're getting so much productivity. They're getting so much more free things. And while I still think it is a big area to invest in, and there's probably going to be returns from it, it doesn't look like the cloud or mobile, or maybe we haven't really discovered the actual business model. But I do think the add-on business model is a pretty crappy one and has this, this race to the bottom dynamics.